Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. We're focusing on strikers today. In the latest twist to the transfer story of the summer, Benjamin Sesko looks to be on his way to Manchester United. So what does this mean for Newcastle and their wantaway striker, Alexander Isak? All right, joining us today, we have the Athletic's David Ornstein and Jacob Whitehead as well. David, I've got a bone to pick with you again. I was ready to talk about Isak, and you've thrown a story in this morning that has really set my running order wild. Benjamin Sesko. Now, let's get this right, because last time I checked, Newcastle had agreed a fee for the 22-year-old with Leipzig. Now you're telling us that Manchester United have once again entered the chat. What is the latest on this?
Well, I think you've got a bone to pick with me because I was about 2 hours late for recording this podcast due to all these transfer stories.
I was going to let you off.
Yeah, I've escaped that one. It's a really fluid situation, and therefore by the time this podcast comes out, things may have changed a bit. But at the time of recording, we'll lay it out as it is. So Newcastle very clearly were working hard to sign Alexander Isak. Manchester United decided that he was their priority target as well. I think it's fair to say Newcastle moved most aggressively, and their situation was more pressing given the desire of Alexander Isak to leave the club, and that can only happen if they've got a replacement in the building of high calibre, and they decided that that would be Sesko. So they made an offer that we reported some days ago. And then they went even higher to try and satisfy RB Leipzig because their initial approach was deemed to be insufficient. And we revealed that the offer was in the region of 80 million euros, actually at least 80 million euros, so higher. The big question was, what are Manchester United going to do? Because still there was no bid to RB Leipzig from them. But then that did arrive. And I think that was 75 million euros plus 10 million euros in add-ons. And since Manchester United came to the party, there seems to be growing suggestions that that is the move that the player would prefer, although not officially confirmed by anybody at that point in time. And then, on the morning of recording this, we reported that Manchester United are closing in on a deal to sign Benjamin Sesko. Within that, we revealed that Newcastle United actually had a bid accepted yesterday, Tuesday, worth 82.5 million euros plus 2.5 million euros in add-ons. So a deal worth 85 million euros. Despite that, this is swinging in Manchester United's direction because it is their belief at Old Trafford and the belief of everybody else involved in the deal now, so Newcastle United, RB Leipzig and various other parties, that the player wants to join Manchester United, that is his choice. And so we'll have to see as and when a deal is going to be agreed between United and RB Leipzig, because that hasn't happened yet. I think there is optimism around it, and this is moving forward towards a conclusion as we speak, but it's not quite there yet. But I think the shift is now pronounced, that Manchester United are in the driving seat to close out a deal with RB Leipzig, and reluctantly, and not for the want of trying, Newcastle United know that the game is pretty much up on this particular player, and they'll have to set their sights elsewhere.
Yeah, Jacob, we're going to go into how Newcastle have really struggled to get some signings over the line this summer a little later on. But I mean, this one is a tricky one because they've put the money on the table but couldn't get the player.
Yeah, and there's an extent to which this is Newcastle almost operating in desperation mode, in the sense of they're very aware that Alexander Isak is likely to be away in the second half of the summer, and they need a replacement, and there's very few top strikers in the market, and Sesko was one of them. They were confident, they put in this big bid, and it's been turned down. He's the latest high-profile player to turn him down as well. Of course, this will be spun by Newcastle as saying this was a player choice to go there. We didn't do anything wrong in the process. They'll probably make some sort of claims around salary, whether that's true or not. But it still fundamentally comes down to that the Newcastle right now are not seen as desirable a location as other top six clubs, despite the fact that they've been in the Champions League twice over the last 3 years. There's other parts of a project which aren't as appealing. There's also a large extent to which they have not necessarily played this process right. They've got a pretty inexperienced football leadership at the moment. There's gaps at CEO, there's gaps at technical director. People who haven't been asked to lead departments before have been asked to step up, and although they may be sort of doing a good job in negotiations, people might like dealing with them. Ultimately, they've not been able to close any of those deals, and it's led to this quite, I say, ultimately humiliating situation where they've been very publicly rejected by a lot of players. Just off the top of my head, there's been Mbremo, Delap, João Pedro, Hyson, Isak wants to leave. So a summer which they entered with real momentum, having reached Champions League again, having ended that trophy drought, having actually felt like they had room to spend for the first time in several windows, has been this awful damp squib.
So it feels like Sesko has chosen northwest over northeast. Here's our Manchester United writer Mark Critchley on what awaits Sesko.
The first thing is Carrington. This isn't the Carrington that you might remember Cristiano Ronaldo complaining about a few years ago. United have spent £50 million on the men's training facility over the last year. It's almost ready to be opened. It gets opened this week. We're going to get a look at it. People are saying state of the art. They're saying best in class. You're hearing all these buzz phrases that we normally hear about this sort of thing. But fundamentally, whatever it looks like, this is a statement of ambition from the club. He's going to be a core part of what is a young squad that should really only improve. And I think this is something that gets lost a little bit. If you look at United's squad, compare them to the rest of the Premier League last season, they were definitely on the younger side. There is a nucleus of young talent at the foundation of that squad that you would hope can be the bedrock of the team that United need to get them back to the top over the next few years. And Sesko can be a part of that. And the third thing that I would say to him is probably the most compelling argument that United have, I think, and that is that this is Manchester United. I kind of hate to use that phrase because it's become a cliche. The joke even has become a cliche, but cliches have a kernel of truth to them. It's a club that now provides a challenge to help revive its fortunes, to get it back to the level that it needs to be. And if you are one of the players that can help United do that, well, that's an opportunity that a lot of players don't get in their career.
Yeah, David, Mark mentioned that United's most compelling argument when attracting players is this is Manchester United. I mean, Jacob touched on it just before we listened to that voice note. Is that just it? Newcastle have the money. They're in the Champions League, but it is still Manchester United for certain types of players.
Yeah, it's clearly the case, despite the fact they're not in European football next season and Newcastle qualified for the Champions League, despite the fact they finished so far down the Premier League last season and have been through all sorts of strife in recent times. But the pull is there, the size of the club, the history, the potential for bringing it back up to that level again. And, you know, no one can deny that the chance to lead the line for Manchester United and Old Trafford is really compelling. Of course, there'll be finances involved as well, and we don't know the full details on that. I'm sure it will emerge in the coming weeks. Newcastle are not an unattractive proposition by any means, despite them missing out on a number of players this summer. You know, they've got Champions League football next season. They've got Eddie Howe as manager. They've ended their long wait for a trophy. They play in a really exciting style of football in front of an amazing fan base in a fantastic stadium, even though they want to either move to a new one or upgrade it. There's a lot to be said for Newcastle United with the Saudi-led ownership and their ambitions. But, you know, there's a lot that you need to think about with this. What sort of markets are they shopping in? Should they be trying to compete for the sort of players they've been going in for this summer? The likes of João Pedro, Brian Mbeumo, Hugo Ekitike, and now, of course, Benjamin Sesko. You can't fault their ambition on that. But is that misplaced ambition? And should they be looking for more realistic targets? Are they able to pay the level of salaries that some of the other leading clubs are able to pay, which is probably swinging the signing of some of these players? I don't know the exact details yet on Sesko. And I think that will take time, and it's a harsh learning curve. That they've made some really good recruits since the takeover, and we saw the likes of Bruno Guimaraes and Isak himself, and you know, various others across the team that have really led them up to this point. But then they've had this period of PSR trouble and a lack of trading, and they've been hamstrung. And now they're trying to get back into recruitment, and it's easier said than done. Look, they've signed a great player in Anthony Elanga this summer. They've managed to get Aaron Ramsdale over the line as goalkeeper, and I'm sure more will come through the door to make them a strong squad again. But they'll be bruised on this, and it'll be really interesting to see in which direction they turn. But there are many pros and cons to this Sesko decision. The pressure of Manchester United, the weight of that shirt and expectation and stadium as a 22-year-old who is still developing, who I think scored 13 league goals last season. And we've seen what the expectation can do to players at Manchester United, especially young players. Whereas at Newcastle, maybe it wouldn't have quite been the same. You may even move on after Newcastle, with total respect to them, to an even bigger level, which probably won't happen at Manchester United. But ultimately, and I'm sure we'll hear the reasons as and when the situation evolves. But it's not a huge surprise given who they are.
David makes a good point, Jacob. I can't help but think, is Sesko making the right decision here?
Yeah, if you look at, obviously more things go into decision than this, but if you look in terms of what's going to improve him as a player, I'd say that Eddie Howe's super skill as a manager, as a head coach, is improving players. You even look at some of those signings who David mentioned earlier, the likes of Guimaraes, of Anthony Gordon, Sven Botman, Joelinton's the perfect example, even though he arrived...
Transformed him as a player.
Even though he arrived before Eddie Howe. Lewis Hall and Livramento, who are signed as more project players. Players improve under Eddie Howe. Like, that is just a given. It's an exception if you don't. When you have a player like Sesko, who's got all of the raw ingredients right there, he's really quick. He's got a powerful shot. Like, the only thing in a way is he going to get more of those sort of slightly scrappy goals? How is he going to turn from a 10, 15 goal a season striker into a 20 goal a season striker? Well, he's done that with Isak. I mean, like, Isak, yes, he was a talented prospect, but he's gone to the next level under Eddie Howe at Newcastle. And if you were going to try to find a place you could develop where you'd have a little bit of space to develop, like, of course there would have been pressure on him. If Isak goes, he is going to be the number 9 striker at a Champions League club. Like, it's not like this would have been all sunshine and rainbows, whatever happened. But I think Eddie Howe is a pretty safe bet if you want to improve your stock. That's where it's going to happen. I just suppose he might have thought, well, if I'm improving here and I ultimately want to go to another club, why am I going to wait 2 years to do it when I could just go now and back my own ability in the interim, which when you're a player, you are going to back your own ability. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, David, the big one is, where does this leave Alexander Isak? He returned back to Newcastle. Liverpool have had a bid rejected by Newcastle for Isak, and it's big money. But now Sesko is going to Manchester United. So potentially anyway. So where does this leave Alexander Isak?
Yeah, we broke the news on Friday, didn't we? That Newcastle rejected Liverpool's opening formal bid of 110 million pounds. Other people have said other things. There was a previous sort of informal approach where Liverpool indicated a willingness to do a deal in the region of 120 million pounds, and some people have said, well, why is the offer that they've come in with lower? I assume it's because you sort of put a marker in the ground, and then if there is a negotiation to be had, try and work your way up. We don't know the exact situation. So Liverpool were indicating that they had no sort of immediate plans to come back with a second bid, given the firm and fast nature of Newcastle's rebuttal. That they didn't view there being much point in that. But let's see how it develops, because Alexander Isak intends to leave Newcastle. And so, yeah, how does this Sesko situation impact it? Well, of course, he would have been, in Newcastle's mind, the replacement. They went for Hitij previously. The word coming out of St James's Park was to play alongside Isak. But I think Isak and his representatives have made clear to Newcastle for some time that their plan is to leave. And I think that Newcastle chapter is closed for Isak from what we're hearing. And so whether or not Newcastle had ideas for playing the Hitij and Isak alongside each other, I don't know how realistic that would have been if it came to fruition that Hitij had arrived. Now Sesko became the target. And there was no suggestion of the two of them playing together. I think that was quite clearly one comes in and then the other will probably be allowed to go out subject to finding the right deal. And now he appears to be going off to Manchester United. Is it a case of game over for Alexander Isak? He has to stay. Well, Newcastle hold his contract until 2028. So the ownership, PIF, and the board executives have the power to hold on to Alexander Isak. But I don't think they are stupid. They know the situation they have on their hands, and they'll continue to find some suitable replacements, whether that's one or two. Because I think they were looking at Sesko as like the Isak replacement, and then somebody like Yohan Wissa or alternative to replace Callum Wilson, who's departed. So let's see what they look at now. There'll be loads of names. Nicolas Jackson has been reported for some time as being under consideration at Newcastle. Ollie Watkins has been floated, but we've got to be quite clear on that. Aston Villa say he is not for sale. He's not going anywhere. This conversation shouldn't even be happening because Ollie Watkins is our striker and he's staying. And there will be other names that come and go in the next days, inevitably, as Newcastle explore avenues. And that's for the sort of main striker, let alone that sort of secondary attacking position. Newcastle will be looking at other recruitment, don't forget. You know, they've long wanted a central defender. We hear stuff about a potential midfielder and, of course, these attacking roles. They'll need to fund that. The money doesn't just grow off trees, and they've not really sold until this point. So perhaps they kind of, I know they wouldn't admit it publicly, but might need the Alexander Isak money in, regardless of this Sesko situation, to get on with their recruitment. And so I just don't want to put sort of firm judgments on how this is going to play out. But as things stand, I don't think the Sesko deal not happening suddenly collapses Alexander Isak's departure. I think by the time the window shuts on the 1st of September, I think there's a very good chance Isak will have departed and his preference is to join Liverpool. And Newcastle will, hopefully for them, find some really good quality replacements, use the money wisely and build another strong team, maybe an even stronger team and squad that can compete on all fronts next season.
Yeah, I mean, no one quite knows how this is going to end up, Jacob, but is it worth Newcastle keeping hold of Isak, a player that doesn't really want to be there? Well, from what we understand anyway.
Like, football's an emotional game, and of course fans are going to be like, well, let's keep him, we need a replacement. He scored a goal which delivered Newcastle their first trophy in 60, 70 odd years. Like, of course people are going to want to, but you can't keep a player there who doesn't want to play. It depreciates their most important asset's value. It'll be really bad for the rest of the squad. Eddie Howe's spoken before publicly and privately about the importance of everyone pulling together and being in one direction. Howe has been quite careful with this. Like, he's made sure to burn no bridges just in case something can be sorted out. But kind of what cards do Newcastle have left to play? We've reported before about how some of this disquiet from Isak stems back to the fact that his contract wasn't sorted last summer, back when Newcastle really were in a little bit of a PSR pit. But I mean, what can they do? Even if they increase their offer to Isak now, they're going to rip up their wage structure, which will cause loads of issues down the line with other players, and there's no guarantee whatsoever that will even change Isak's mind. So that in itself is a risky play. You can't just chuck an offer on the table and hope that that's going to stick. There's a point where ultimately they have to carry on doing what they're doing and find a high-level replacement and let Isak go. I think we always want to reach for solutions and say this is a good solution, and sometimes it's not a good solution. Sometimes it's the best of a number of suboptimal situations, and that's where Newcastle have found themselves.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of scratching my head at Ekitike and Isak playing for Liverpool in the season to come. Absolutely devastating. Anyway, it's just occurred to me that actually Newcastle play Espanyol on Friday in a friendly. Will Isak play? How will the fans receive him? I mean, it's quite a precarious kind of situation, isn't it?
I think he's highly unlikely to play. He's been training alone from the team. He's still recovering from an injury, which was initially the reason given for why he didn't go on the Singapore tour. And as for how the fans react, like, well, it's hypothetical. I don't think he'll play, but it's tribal. Someone said they don't want to be there. It's a passionate fan base, so it wouldn't be a good reception.
David, the breaking news doesn't stop there, does it? Minutes just before we started recording the podcast, probably while you were late, you reported that Al Hilal have reached an agreement in principle to sign Darwin Nunez from Liverpool. What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of excitement and sort of reporting around it, but the fact of the matter is Darwin Nunez was always expected to depart Liverpool this summer. And it's related, of course, to Liverpool's search for a new frontman, and their main target is Alexander Isak. And there was all sorts of possibilities. We saw Saudi Arabian approaches for him in January. And I think Liverpool turned down some pretty massive offers, 75 million euros. I've even heard possibly more than that. And they wanted to keep him at least until the summer with confidence that they could sort of get a substantial price out of him then if a sale was to happen, and also extract value from him in the final months of the season. Whether or not they got that is debatable, but they won the league title, so they won't be too displeased. So come the summer, Al Hilal, I think, made an inquiry to Liverpool, expressed an interest. I think it was in June, and Liverpool told them the conditions of a deal. I think there was multiple clubs looking at him, expressions of interest from European teams, and the sort of Saudi pursuit had set the bar on sort of price and what needed to happen. The team that has really come through to try and make his signing possible is Al Hilal, and they kind of got their ducks in a row at their end to make an approach to the player and to Liverpool. By that I mean they were joined up in the thinking that they wanted to provide Simone Inzaghi with this player. That was his choice. He's deemed a really good stylistic fit for how Inzaghi and his Al Hilal team play. And then it comes down to numbers, of course, and convincing him to join. So the latest information I've got is that there's an agreement in principle that's been sort of struck verbally, worth, I think it is 53 million euros, there or thereabouts, plus add-ons.
What do you think of that price? Is that cheap for Darwin Nunez, considering what they were quoted before?
Well, it's lower, which you might say is understandable given his performances last season. I personally think at 26 years old, Uruguay international, what he did before he came to Liverpool, but if you look at his stats at Liverpool as well, they're better than many Premier League strikers. Maybe it's clouded somewhat by some of the chances he's missed that have been used as a stick to beat him. I think quite unfairly. They really like him at Liverpool as a character. They do like his profile. Maybe he's not the best stylistic fit for Arne Slot's side, and that's why they're pursuing a new striker. And so, therefore, I think a return of 54 million euros there or thereabouts plus add-ons, it is something that all parties will probably be quite pleased with. It doesn't feel like extraordinarily low or high, and yeah, I think it's a huge moment for Al Hilal if they get this over the line and the Saudi Pro League to sign a player of that quality and fit for that team at that age, and he's quite an iconic figure as well. I think is just huge for them. In terms of the player side, that's all verbal at the moment as we record this. He has given indications of a willingness to accept the transfer. I think they still have to go through bits and bobs. It's never easy, and it's not done yet. There are steps that need to be taken if all goes to plan. I think Al Hilal are on a pre-season training camp in Germany, and he would go out there and join up with them, and then leave a bit of a gap in the front line at Anfield.
Yeah, it's a little tenuous link here, Jacob, but I'm just thinking, PIF, the Saudi Public Investment Fund, who obviously own controlling stakes at Newcastle, and also...
I don't think it's tenuous.
Do you reckon? Oh, well, it's fair, because I'm just thinking, could they be helping out Liverpool if Nunez is now being shipped off to Saudi, to Al Hilal, which is a team they also own stakes in, and clear the way for Isak to just walk straight in?
It's a totally fair question to ask. I mean, there's been criticism of PIF before from Newcastle supporters of saying, hang on, why haven't they helped us out with PSR? Why has there not been a massive bid in? for X or Y who's on the edge of a Newcastle team. I suppose a few things it's probably worth making clear. One is just the size of PIF as an entity. This isn't necessarily a super clean-cut decision-making process. Like the domestic football side and the international football side are often run pretty separate as institutions. There's not always this massively joined-up thinking. And the main thing I'd say, though, is we're sometimes too guilty of seeing this, I guess, from sort of Premier League lens. From a Newcastle fan, you might be like, well, why are we funding Isak's purchase? But if you're looking at it, as David mentioned, from the Al Hilal perspective, from an SPL perspective, this is a huge deal signing Nunez in and of itself. Sure. And all information I've had coming out of Saudi sport in the last year or two has been that almost, I guess, the huge focus is domestic, both on the national team as we move towards the World Cup in 2034 and on the domestic league. Like the whole reason why these reforms are in place is to try and sort of motivate and incentivize a really young, I guess, population. And having some of the best players in the world playing for Al Hilal is kind of, in a way, ultimately more important to them than does a foreign investment have the best striker they possibly can. This might feel weird if you're looking at this from a Premier League perspective, but I think if you're thinking about it from more of a geopolitical perspective, that is ultimately the reality of it. The priorities aren't always in line.
A couple more names to throw into the mix. You mentioned Nicolas Jackson earlier, and you've also mentioned him as ones to watch on the deal sheet this week. What's going on with him?
Yeah, Nicolas Jackson is an absolutely sort of crucial part of this whole narrative and conversation, because if clubs are going to be missing out on targets for the number 9 position, they're going to be looking for alternatives. There are not too many alternatives, and one of them, very high among them, is Nicolas Jackson, because Chelsea, I think reluctantly, in a season where they'll have Champions League football and could do with some depth in the number 9 position, would trade him if the price is right. Or the deal is right. Sometimes these things involve players. And I think Jackson, from what I hear, is keen to be the main man, which is not going to happen at Chelsea with Liam Delap and João Pedro arriving. And so that presents an opportunity. Whatever people in the public think and say about him, he ranks extremely highly on the data of many of the top clubs. They like him. And yeah, there have been some things about his personality, petulance, a couple of red cards, wrestling the ball for a penalty. People that know him and work with him actually speak very highly of him as a boy, really nice kid, and perhaps it's the exuberance, the sort of energy that he has. But he's got a decent record. He is Premier League ready, and so you'll have. Newcastle will have him among the players they'll be looking at. If Manchester United didn't get Sesko, I think he would have been a consideration. I'm not sure they would have gone through with it. There are teams on the continent. I think AC Milan like him, Juventus, and Aston Villa have been linked to many clubs. And so in the next days and weeks of this market, I think he's going to be a major story. And I would expect him to be leading the line elsewhere come September the 1st, but some things have to happen before we get to that point.
Okay, very quick word on Son Heung-min leaving Spurs after 10 years. What's the chat there? Is he off to America? Is that the whole idea?
Yeah, I've not been working across this one, but yeah, I think it's been quite well documented on The Athletic and elsewhere that he is not only LAFC bound, he's there. I think he's arrived, and that's a major signing for MLS. I think it's a record financially, but for what it the status, what it stands for, it's huge for America, especially in the build up to the 2026 World Cup. Nice move for Son. I think he deserves that. He's been incredible for Tottenham. People have been reminding me of the report I did, the tweet I posted when Tottenham were weighing up attacking options and they were pursuing Saido Berahino. There was a problem with that deal, and ultimately it led them to sort of pursue talks with this guy called Son Heung-min, and they got that deal done. The rest is history, and he's had a beautiful time at Spurs. Nice that it ended with a trophy. He's led the team by example on the pitch and with the armband at times, and yeah, Tottenham will wish him well. It leaves a bit of a hole, but they've reinforced a bit already. They'll continue to be active in the market, and it's farewell son.
Oh, very good, David. Very good. Can we say this is the striker window, Jacob? Sesko Situation, Isak, Darwin Nunez now to add to the list?
Think so. But then I guess it's kind of natural for these things come in waves. Like we talked about the window of a number 6. And so much of this comes around because there is a finite amount of money to go around with PSR. And so if everyone's spending it on number 6s, are you going to go and spend it on a striker? And then, of course, as soon as one move comes, another team has a hole, or of teams who have been chasing them suddenly realise, hang on, we need to get someone else. And deals don't exist in a vacuum, as we've just sort of seen with Isak, Nunez, Sesko, all being in some ways sort of not reliant on each other, but they're all in play. And I think that's just what we're seeing with strikers. I mean, like, Arsenal knew they'd be after one of them, and so then once they gone for Gyökeres, that means that Sesko might go somewhere else, which means that Man U missed out on X, which means Y, and that's just what we're seeing. We're in throes of it right now, and I don't know, it all feels like it might be done we're often quite used to this going into kind of the final couple of days of the window, but I mean, like, there's a month left.
There's a few more names in the market too, Jacob. Kolo Muani, who obviously went on loan in the second half of last season, was it, to Juventus from PSG. And that I don't think there's been a resolution on his case. I'm just looking down some notes I made. We've covered Jackson, Watkins, Wissa, Gonzalo Ramos, maybe surplus to requirements at PSG is another one that I think could be obtained and is being looked at by a number of clubs. Strand Larsen at Wolves did really well, and people have linked him to Newcastle and some other clubs. I think Wolves would be expecting to keep him. He did impress Molineux in his debut campaign, and so perhaps there's still room for some striker movement, but before it shuts. We've even had Callum Wilson go down to West Ham. Another story we broke, and if he can stay fit, you'd see him doing a really good job there. So definitely, sorry to steal your thunder, Jacob, it is the striker summer. I don't feel I've talked about anything else.
Well, and as I said in pre-record, I mean, it's the big Nathan Broadhead move to Wrexham. Still be on the cards.
We forgot about that.
Kiefer Moore moved to Wrexham too.
Wrexham as well. We were talking about that just before we started recording as well. I still think it's greed on Liverpool's part to take Isak and Ekitike in one window. But hey, this is football, gents. Thank you so much for your time, David, Jacob. I really appreciate it. And also thank you guys for watching as well. Don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Drop us a cheeky comment as well. We'll catch you soon. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.